Welcome to this Hot Topics proposal. The Hot Topics proposal is coming later than papers, and not only do you have to say what you're going to do, you have to give some sense of why you didn't just put it in as a normal paper. And there have been quite a few sessions on AI. Unsurprisingly, for those of us that take an interest in these things, we spent a lot of last year and the year before worrying what would be happening in terms of AI. That was the title, Artificial Intelligence in Education, Moral Panic or Transformative Technology, or potentially both. I should say that David, Mary and I are all members of the Philosophy of Education Society. We don't really have a special interest group. It's more of a group that's with a special interest in artificial intelligence, and we've been meeting online for the last few months, and we thought that it would be a good plan to come to Bureau. We did open it up to anybody else on Twitter, or now X, but nobody else wanted to come with us. So the plan today is to have a very open discussion stimulated by three inputs, not necessarily any answers. And we ought to say that the whole thing's being recorded so people can look at it later, should they wish to. But it does mean that if you speak, you will be recorded. And if you're speaking, we'd like to be able to get a microphone to you. But we don't want this to be a kind of Q&A session with the three of us. We do want it to be a much more of a trying to figure out what's going on session across the whole room. So it'd be great if that can happen. We're going to be about 7 to 10 minutes input and then discussion about each input. So we'll have a little input, a little discussion around it, next input. And at the end of those, hopefully we'll have a good 40, 45 minutes for open discussion around the room around AI. And hopefully we're going to all do something a bit different, though I know we've been inspired by similar kinds of texts. And if you are interested in joining the Philosophy Education Society group on AI, it's an open group. You don't have to be a philosopher, but some sessions are quite philosophical. And you certainly don't have to be a member of the society to join. Just send me your email on the BERA app, and I'll add you to our distribution list, and you'll get things about what we're doing in the next year. And I'll also say that I also lead an AI group within Society for Research in Higher Education, and we're doing a seminar series online during the year as well. And if anybody's particularly interested in higher education, drop me a line and I will add you to the distribution list for the SRHE group looking at AI in higher education. So without more ado, I'm going to hand over to Mary and we'll switch over slides to hers.
While that's coming up, I may as well introduce myself. So I'm Mary Richardson. I'm based at UCL at the Institute of Education, where I'm the Professor of Educational Assessment. So as you might imagine, I'm really interested in assessment and all things assessment. But I'm also really interested in the fact that, thank you, that's perfect, that up to now, there's not a great deal of engagement of philosophy in assessment. I come from a policy background, and the policy in assessment is very technical. How does the test work? What does that mean in assessment? I'm much more interested in the meaning of assessments and the impacts they have on individuals. So that's where the work with PSGB comes in. So I kind of, sit in various camps. And in relation to this, it goes back to a paper that was published in Burge, the British Educational Research Journal, a couple of years back with my colleague, Dr. Mary Healy, where we explored ethical behaviours and assessment in higher education too. And we looked at that from a philosophical context and what we mean by ethical behaviours. And it seems so relevant when ChatGPT sort of unleashed itself on us last year. And what struck me most in terms of my own research and interest in assessment is people's attitudes towards test takers, or those people being assessed, okay, the assessees. What comes out straight away for me, and I think is of most interest, is what I call a discourse of deceit, which I think people immediately assume, how is this going to be used for cheating? That's the constant discussion and discourse that comes out in public settings, and it comes out in universities too, in schools, etc. And I think just observing those discourses and collecting information made me think again about our work on this ethical environment and where we wanted to take it next. So I'm looking at this from a university point of view, but I suppose this could be translated into any phase of education, to be honest, depending on where we go with large language models and how they evolve. One of the things that we know is there's not much agreement about exactly what constitutes unethical behaviour at universities. And what Mary and I found, so it's Mary and Mary, we always do this work together, is that there's actually still quite a slim literature on the idea of ethical environments in educational settings, what that means. So thinking about, where these moral panics arise and how we understand them within the context of an ethical environment. Of course, we know in universities and other educational settings, you've got processes, procedures. We're all quite well versed with the idea of ethics boards, disciplinary systems, codes of conduct, etc. And there are also regulations. So we also work out kind of measures and penalties for infringing things, infringing any ethical procedures. And this is a problem now with these large language models. What do we mean by this? So one of the things I'm concerned about is, what does cheating actually look like if you are saying someone's going to cheat? Where do we draw the line with large language models? Because there's a difficulty in determining perhaps who owns what. And some of the discussions I've had with colleagues at a recent seminar in PSGB is, can you actually say that someone owns that writing? To the extent that they own their perhaps own writing, but then they put it into a large language model, it's adapted. What does that mean in terms of the ownership of the writing? And is that cheating? Because does that writing belong to the people who developed the technology for the large language model, etc. So we've got all these ideas around it as well as to ownership of our writing and our thinking. And I suppose one of the things that this has led me to think about then was, again, coming back to conceptualising this idea of an ethical environment. And there's two key pieces of work for those of you who are interested afterwards. Please, if you'd like to read more on this, Simon Blackburn's work from 2001. He actually writes a really nice outline conceptualising what an ethical environment would look like in educational settings. So thinking about how we can actually compartmentalise things, how we can conceive of things, what we expect of ourselves and of one another. And I think also really interestingly is this last statement in relation to writing and academic writing of our students. What causes us pride, what perhaps causes shame, anger, etc., and what can be forgiven and what cannot. And I'm going to come on to that briefly in a minute. The other work, of course, that's very important here, and I recommend you going to as well, is Graham Hayden's work as well from a similar time. And I think this is important that we have that awareness of this ethical environment that's circling this moral panic that seems to be happening with large language models. And as he says, particular individuals might ignore aspects of it. We might have different moral notions, but we still have to live within that broad scope of an ethical environment. So we have to think about how we act within that. What does that mean to us, and what constitutes ethical behaviour? And I think this is something with things like ChatGPT that we're still trying to navigate these very difficult waters. So coming back to that thing I said at the beginning, this discourse of deceit and cheating, we know that there's kind of three conceptions in higher ed where we talk about cheating. So we talk about plagiarism, we talk about cheating, and we also perhaps talk about fraud sometimes. And a lot of the research, and there's a lot of now research obviously coming out in the last year or two in relation to large language models specifically, but we've got lots of evidence for why people cheat, how they do it, when they do it, etc. We've also found this work by Molnar and Kletke from 2012 talks about how students become over time more willing to cheat, depending on the levels of accountability and stress they're under. And that is replicated in studies in the last couple of years as well, where students actually might work together in online settings and feel that perhaps if they see other people doing it, then maybe that gives them an excuse as well. They feel more comfortable about doing it. So the justification for using these things is very complex as well, and it's something I haven't explored in detail, but it's kind of on my checklist of things I want to explore. Because one of the questions that I'm really interested in is this idea about, is it okay to cheat systems, such as using ChatGPT? Is it really cheating? And how does that differ to other conceptions of cheating, all within this ethical environment? Because ways of thinking about academic dishonesty, particularly in relation to high-stakes assessments, are rife. That picture on the right there is from a state in northern India. It was taken about 6 years ago. There's a national test in the state that determines what university you go to. And the people outside the building are family members of test takers who are being asked questions and they're passing answers through the walls back to people. Now, people often sort of smile a bit at this, but this is a really extreme example of very open kind of dishonesty, if you like, but it also shows you the lengths people will go to if you put them under that much pressure. That building is now patrolled by armed guards on the test days, so parents can't get anywhere near it because these pictures caused an international furore. But the idea about thinking about how we conceptualise academic dishonesty is getting more and more complex. So it's not simply plagiarism. You can actually buy work online. Students, may lend it to each other. They may actually try and bribe staff. They may bribe each other. And now we've got this notion of how will they use large language models. And one of the words that's used a lot in the press around this is this term of gaming. Now, I've just finished a 3-year project working with Pearson International where we've been looking at how students taking language tests for citizenship and for working in other countries, how they interact with AI components within those tests, their conception of what the AI is capable of or not. And the word gaming comes up a lot. And I have a problem with that word because I don't think it is a game. And I think gaming is not a good word for us to use when we're talking about this because it's not playing, it's actually potentially subverting a system. And I think we need to think quite carefully about the words we use when we're talking about this kind of dishonesty in relation to these sort of moral panics. Thinking about this from an assessment point of view, and this is my final slide, these are some of the questions I'm trying to grapple with. As thankfully Richard said at the very beginning, we don't have any answers today. The purpose of today is to open up some of the discussions about our thinking so that we can develop them more and hopefully, through and with the society and with other members, discuss these ideas more. I think firstly, I'm interested in, do we all agree what that cheating could look like in academic contexts in relation to the use of AI models and what they can bring to helping us with teaching and learning. I'm interested in how people conceptualise cheating in online spaces and understand it. And also this idea about gaming, where do we draw the line with this? Is it the same as cheating? And I think finally, this is something that someone fed back to me in a seminar recently when I was talking on this subject, was they said a very fundamental question here that we come back to is that our educational landscapes aren't level. We don't start from the same places. So does it really matter the extent to which some cheating may be used by people in order to make up for a lack of privilege? And is that okay? And what does that look like? And I'm going to leave you with those, tricky questions, and we'll come back to it afterwards. So thank you for listening.
Okay, I don't know whether this is on. What we thought we'd do is just take some initial questions for clarification. Any particular comments? It doesn't have to be a question, it can just be a comment. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for your presentation. I just want to pick you up on the issue of gaming. And to my mind, gaming is just getting an advantage. And we do it around the world. So why are we saying that the kids are cheating, or what we call it cheating, when we all do gaming at some level?
It's a really good question, and I think that's what the problem with the word is the kind of words that we use and how we actually conceive of what we will allow or not allow is genuinely problematic when we come to thinking about any level of dishonesty. It's a bit like, I don't know, driving at 35 miles an hour in a 30 zone when you know you shouldn't be, but you're actually doing it and it's only a few miles an hour. No, I think it's a difficult part of this that we're trying to unpick. And it's interesting because in the experts that I was working with at Pearson who are looking at AI interactions with students and trying to catalogue means of gaming that are being used in different countries around the world, they use that term. And yes, as they say, it's a very, very serious issue for them because as fast as they are creating new technology to try and stop people from subverting the system or using it in dishonest ways, people are creating new ways of working their way around the system. And what was interesting at the end of it was I said, do you think there's a final way that we can adapt assessment to try and prevent this? And they said, no, we've got no idea. We don't know how to do it. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'm interested in whether, when you were talking about it's like high stake assessments, whether the marketisation of education has made a difference. So the fact that now students are buying a degree and not buying an education. So the end point is their ticket rather than the process of sort of getting there. And I wonder whether this neoliberal has had an effect.
I think, the evidence shows us that, yes, it has. It's had a profound effect on behaviour, on mental health, on actually how students see and conceive of success. And so I think the idea of then introducing, a model into this or a way of creating work that you can use, that you can personalise, has just added to that, that whole sort of, that whole culture of where we are. But I also want to say on the other side, I am still concerned about the fact that we come from a discourse or a base of they're going to cheat. Because the majority of people don't actually cheat. The majority of students don't cheat. And there's a lot of research in that. I can only think there's a lot of work in England, but there's work around the world. And when I worked in exam boards, that kind of data is data you collect on an annual basis. And the actual cheating, of course, that's the cheating you find, but it's minuscule. I mean, it's 0.00% of your candidature that you will ever catch. So if you smooth those statistics to allow for the ones you don't catch, it's tiny. So, thanks.
Okay, we'll take one more and then we'll go over to David. Thanks.
I'm a sixth form teacher and I had to start addressing this issue last term, but I took the view that we should actually discuss the values underlying academic integrity. Do you think we should be teaching and discussing and re-examining the values behind integrity and cheating? Why?
Definitely. Yes, I think that's a really important part of this, and I think it's an important thing that's come out of this kind of explosion and this moral panic, as we called it, that this is an opportunity that we should be grabbing and using to talk about what writing is, what integrity is, what does it mean to you. Because interestingly enough, a lot of my own students at UCL, I've been leading a working group since January on looking at assessment design and so-called proofing it against AI, which is impossible, by the way. But a lot of the feedback I've had from student focus groups I've done is lots of students have said, well, actually, why would you do that? There's integrity around, I want to know that this is my work, that this is my master's, my degree, my PhD, or whatever it is they're talking about. So it's been a very important point. I would definitely salute that idea of spending time with it, particularly sixth formers.
Okay, great. We'll pick up these points
so
again
much.
towards the end. Thanks, Mary. Hand over to David.
Thank you. Hi everyone, so I'm David Aldridge. I'm Professor of Education and Philosophy at Edge Hill University. I'm also Head of the Department of Secondary and Further Education. But my involvement in these conversations has more been in virtue of working in a higher education institution. That's where, and if I've to the extent I've experienced the moral panic, that's where it's been happening. I've had less to do with what's been happening in schools at the moment. I would say I've sort of been kept at arm's length from what's been happening in the university. I did say when a group was convened to look at how we should look at assessment in relation to AI, I did say, oh yeah, I've been writing about related things. And colleagues said, yeah, we've been along to some of your phenomenology talks, Dave. It's not really what we're after. We've got EdTech people, they're going to look after it. So this is my opportunity, outside of Edge Hill, to say this is why I'd like to have been on those groups, really. Okay, so those were your two questions, Richard. What's the potential for AI to be transformative for learning and teaching? What are the dangers, real or imaginary, of using AI in education? So my approach to that's going to be, and you can look at this, depending on where you're coming from, this can be something which could be a positive transformation, or it could be a danger, depending on where you are in this. What if students could succeed without knowing anything? I'm interested in certain kinds of sort of variations of the Turing test, which are about passing. What if you could pass for a knower without actually knowing? It's worth saying that a lot of higher education for many students probably is about a certain kind of passing. What can I get away with? How can I look like I've achieved the kind of outcomes that I think my tutors want? And I don't now need to sort of recap some of Mary's points. I'm not so worried about the issue of whether students will cheat. I don't need to say the bit I was going to say about actually for some disadvantaged students, this could actually be a really beneficial thing to have access to ways of passing that other students already have access to. So I'm not so much worried about that. Interestingly, Chris Brown said a very similar thing in the plenary session to what I'm going to say next. It's more of an issue of whether it will put us out of business. And again, that's not something I'm particularly worried about, but I am interested in why someone might have that concern. So yeah, the picture is a version of Searle's Chinese room. The idea is the Chinese input goes in, it is then interpreted by someone inside who doesn't speak Chinese. They've got a set of instructions, a set of algorithms in English, and the algorithms tell them, in relation to that Chinese input, which Chinese response they should give. The system passes for someone who knows Chinese, but the issue is the person inside doesn't speak Chinese. Now, there's a quick philosophical response you can give to that, of course, because if you're thinking about minds, there is no person inside. The system itself, given that it follows the algorithms, potentially could be thought of as knowing Chinese. But I'm interested, I'll just leave that one, that question of is this about being able to pass for a knower? And I think that leads us on to an opportunity, which is to attempt to offer a fuller account of what it is to know. And what I'm going to say there is that I think there is a moral panic here, but we're panicking about the wrong thing. I don't think we should be panicking about AI. I don't think we should be panicking about the arrival of large language models. I think rather this arrival has exposed elements of the phenomenon of knowledge that have been forgotten or discarded in the contemporary context of education and high-stakes assessment. So what I mean by that is that there are some things we have forgotten such that it is now possible for AI to arrive and offer the kinds of affordances that it appears to be offering to students. So that's why I'm going to largely talk about my own work now and papers that I've written, which I think have been attempting to point out some of those losses. And it's not the large language models themselves, as I say, that are the problem. So I just want to talk about very quickly about three aspects of knowledge that I think we don't talk enough about. I'm thinking of the university context, but also the context of schooling. I think these are dropped out by prevailing cognitive science accounts of learning, for example, which are very popular in schooling. Firstly, that knowledge is acquired against a background, that it has an embodied history, and even when we talk about embodied knowledge, there's that element of it's an embodied history. There was a way that we arrived at that knowledge, which is inextricable from the form that knowledge then takes, and that knowledge is transformative of the knower. And obviously part of this is about avoiding an easy conflation of knowledge with information. Information is part of the way that we attempt to encode our explications of what the knowledge is, but the knowledge itself is something more mysterious, less easily broken up into discrete cells or components. So firstly then, knowledge is background. This is from a paper I wrote about epiphanies, and the argument I was making in this paper, I was arguing against the idea as epiphany as a discrete moment of clarity. I actually think that's usually a sort of mythical moment which is imposed kind of autobiographically. I think knowing is something much more gradual than that. So what I want to emphasize here is that sort of relation of backgrounding and emerging to knowledge. Things that we experience seep down and are lost, and then they re-emerge unbidden later. Often their origins are unknown. There is a meandering, surprising and personal route that knowledge takes. So I was thinking about my infant son. My son now, the son I was writing about here, is now about 12 years old. I think he knows quite a lot about the nature of our relationship, but he can't point to the particular experiences which contribute to that knowledge. There's that sort of dark soil in which that relationship was formed. Obviously, this kind of story is opposed to what we were calling good old-fashioned AI. Those representational models of AI, a largely abandoned project, of course. We don't have those representations somewhere down there buried in the dark soil. Of course, large language models have, interestingly, sometimes it's called, they have all the text that they learn from. Sometimes that's called a corpus. One of the big differences between your student and the large language model is that your student does have a corpus. Your student has a body. The large language model just has these trillions of words which it has access to. Now, that's interesting to think about because many students succeed only with reading a handful of words. And you might justify the trillions of words are why the product of large language models is able to appear creative. You know, the bigger the corpus, the more the text, the more possibility there is for creativity. I wonder what it would look like if we trained an AI just on the text that even your most committed student had actually read. You know, the potential for creativity then would really be quite clear. There would be a clear difference. So the AI is only able to offer those affordances of creativity because of all these trillions of words, which of course have nothing to do with the way that we acquire knowledge. And of course, much of what goes on in that dark soil is tacit. It can't be explicated. It's wordless. There are some colleagues, I think, you'll know these colleagues, who want to come in and tell you absolutely everything they've read. And you know, you have a sense that when they stop talking, it's because there is nothing else. They don't have anything more to tell you. Well, of course, the AI has no tacit background. There is only what it tells you. If I had more time, maybe in the questions we could talk about that situation, which is often pointed out, that we can't make an AI which can make a cup of tea in an in an unfamiliar kitchen. The whole sort of complexity of that process exposes that when we're looking at human knowers, we're thinking of something which Dreyfus, following Heidegger, has called a referential totality. It's characterized by excess, irreducibility, by concernful dealings with things. And it's perhaps best thought of as a set of orientations and projects that can't easily be put into words. Keep forgetting I'm using that one. Okay, knowledge is history. You don't have to worry about the significant amount of text I've offered you there, looking at the time. But here, this is in an article which was actually about cheating education, and I was thinking vaguely about AI when I wrote this. But I was thinking of the possibility of inserting knowledge, using technology to insert knowledge. Actually, Chris also mentioned this in the plenary. He talked about Elon Musk's neural lace, which of course will be an affordance that will only be as useful as whatever AI it connects the bearer to. But in this story, the Child Garden by Jeff Ryman, everyone in society is educated by being given a virus which restructures the biological shape of their brain. And the main character, Milena, has some problem with the original exposure to that virus. It doesn't take, it happens later, and that makes her different and deviant from the people around her. And at one point, she's trying to sort of hide mentally, and she moves down into her consciousness and tries to take refuge in, she just tries to hide in all of her knowledge about Marx. But as she's hiding in all of this knowledge, she takes on the character of the original donor, if you like, of that knowledge, of the person who read Marx, and she begins to lose her personality in that person. It's actually a perilous moment in the text, and she has to escape from it, because of course it's very hard to distinguish the biological gift that she was given of knowing from being that person who'd originally read Marx. And finally, onto the body. Knowledge is body. So we talked about history, talk about body. So I'm going to read this one. To acknowledge that texts have a texture is to acknowledge that they affect or feel to the one who understands in a particular way. Texts have a grain, which can, of course, be read against. What we read can give us goosebumps, make our hackles rise, our flesh crawl, or our hairs stand up. What is read or encountered as an object of learning can inspire, frustrate, hearten, sadden, repulse, or maybe most frequently in schooling, bore stiff. So where do those three elements leave us? So I'm offering some things that we might want to pick up in the conversation. So firstly, that relation between knowledge and its background is a dialectical relationship. One of the things we're often told by E.D. Hirsch and other people that are influenced to some extent by cognitive science is that the way something like cultural literacy is bringing about equity is by furnishing everybody with the same kind of background. So it brings about social justice by furnishing it. Now, the problem is you can't furnish a background. It's background all the way down. Any attempt to furnish a background will be given against a pre-existing background. So given that dialectical relationship, we could adopt a term which is often used in those sort of teaching and learning circles in higher education. We could talk about constructive alignment. And we could say, given that the acquisition of knowledge is a dialogic process, and that actually what we might be preparing for is some kind of dialogic outcome, that we might focus then on making sure that we are teaching through dialogue and potentially that we are assessing through dialogue. We might foreground that particularised history of knowledge. So we might foreground those biographical, individual, responsive components in assessment. We should remind ourselves, I've tried to give an impression that all subjects are practice-based. So I'm often told, well, it's easy for you in teacher education because you can watch people teach, you can ask them what they do in a particular situation, they can be responsive to a situation. And it's worth remembering that I don't identify teacher education, yes, it is a knowing how, as being significantly different from other disciplines which are also knowing how. So it's remembering those knowing how elements. If we're teaching literature and we want our students to be literary knowers, that means that they know how to go on in certain kinds of situations. So they are practice-based as well. They have knowing how elements. And finally, going back to that transformative question, I think those acknowledgements of knowledge's background, of its history, of its embodiment, connect us, I think, with that question of the moral purpose of what we are doing. Education is transforming students' history, it's transforming their bodies. So it leads us to that question of what kind of knowers do we want students to be, and of course, what kind of knowers do they want to be? I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, I don't know whether there's any immediate responses, questions to David.
Come back to Mike. Good morning again. I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but just wanted to ask a question about when you were doing your presentation, I got the sense that you were looking primarily at a more romanticized idea of what knowledge is about, or how we perceive knowledge to be back then. But in this current, what should they call it, high-stakes testing environment, do students, or are students really interested in learning about knowing? Are they more interested in just getting a pass? And I'm speaking in the context of not only primary and secondary schools, but also in the context of university. Because they work in university, and the reality is that over the years, what they have seen is that students are no longer interested in developing like lifelong learning skills. They're more about, I want an A. The first thing they ask you, is this an easy course to get an A? Yeah. So they're not concerned about lifelong learning, they're concerned about the result, which is an A. So I think to challenge your thinking, I wonder if we are supposed to move, if first of all, if we are out of step in terms of how we are thinking about knowledge creation, and secondly, if we shouldn't move more towards competency-based assessments as a way to get away from the more cognitive, what should they call, that recall level, and move towards higher order thinking in that regard.
So competency-based assessment as you move towards at the end might be something worth talking about, I think, in relation to the kinds of things I've tried to say. I want to respond to the romanticising charge. I don't think I do. I mean, I think I started off saying, you know, if all students want to do is move on to the next stage, why shouldn't they pass? You know, what I mean by pass is pass for something else. You know, but what I'm trying to get to is, if we're worried about them passing for something else, we should probably try and pin down what the something else is. So I'm only trying to, you know, if we're not worried that there is a something else, then I'm, as is sort of in the background of Mary's, you know, we've got to pin down what it is we're concerned about here. Cheating per se is not necessarily a problem in higher education if all you want for the students is for them to get good results and go on to their jobs. There must be a reason why cheating is part of the problem. So I'm just trying to pin down, I don't think I'm being romantic, I'm trying to pin down what there might be to worry about if students were passing for something else. What might be the something else that we were worried that they were passing for?
Thanks. Okay, move. Oh, so at the back. Yeah, it's that one then. Sorry.
Thank you for a fascinating talk. As an avid reader of science fiction, I'm wondering how future-proof your 3 characteristics of knowledge are. You know, at what stage might a robot with an AI in its skull get a background, and could that be considered an embodied someone with an embodied history? Could the AI there be something transformed as a knower?
Yeah, great. Two things on that. So one is I'm giving a session at 3:30 into the Human and Intelligent Special Interest Group where I'm asking exactly those kinds of questions. But just quickly, I mean, the first thing to acknowledge is, of course, that the AI does have a body, really. There is always a substrate, yeah? The data is always stored somewhere, but it's a very different kind of substrate, you know, and you'll get that in human enhancement circles. You know, they're worried about the meat body. They want to escape into some kind of data space, but of course, it won't be untethered from something physical. That's the first thing. The second thing is Hubert Dreyfus, the great critic, Richard will probably say more about the great critic of good old-fashioned AI, says, oh, if you could reconstruct the body, you'd be in a whole different space. Yeah, so he says artificial intelligence on the good old-fashioned project isn't going anywhere. But on the other hand, if we started by attempting to reconstruct the body, then you've got to ask, what are the characteristics of the body such that it is conducive to intelligence? So remember, Homo sapiens, etymologically, it's the wise human, it's the knowing human, it's also the human that can taste. That's the etymology of it. You know, you have a tongue, you use it to speak, you use it to taste. But more of that this afternoon, yeah.
If nothing else, we're good at marketing ourselves. Okay. Ooh. Okay. So I'm going to try and at least partially try and suggest some answers. So that's my plan in the few minutes. I want to start though with a couple of criticisms. It seems to me that the key issue, the moral panic around AI, is, as David and Mary have alluded to already, which is that it makes us really worried about what the point of a university is. And I want to say, of course, we talk about it as a neoliberal university. It's quite handy to talk about the neoliberal university because that deflects the fact that it's you and me that have produced the university as it is and our predecessors. And what's the problem with the present university, what's the problem with AI, is that we've created courses and assessments that can be done by computer. And I think that's true in schools as well. And so the first thing we need to do is to take moral responsibility for our abject failure. And that AI is a product of that failure. The only reason it's a problem is because we failed in our duty to society, to history, to our predecessors, and to our successors. And so I see AI as a moment of redemptive power. For those interested in reading in kind of religious philosophy, people like John Hick have argued that there are various forms of secular religiosity that set forward a kind of problem, but they need to set forward a solution, a salvation as well. And so what I'm trying to do here is partially to give a practical side to the solution and also to kind of spell out the difficulties that we have. And it seems to me that one of the key questions is, what does it mean to be educated? And what does it mean to be educated at a higher level? What does it mean to be a human who's been educated to a particular high level? And I don't think we've ever really addressed that question in what we do. And what I want to do in terms of suggesting a particular solution is also explore and think about and take forward David's notions around knowledge. I think I want to go a bit further and talk about what it means to be human and what it means to be human in that kind of process of being educated. And I want to start by launching from a suggestion by David Boord from Australia. David was over in the UK earlier this year and gave a few papers. And he started off with this solution that what we should do is that we should make module assessment formative. And sorry for those who don't have the modular program distinctions in their systems, but I'm sure it could be translated. I think most of us do these days. But the modular assessment should be formative, and we should have a limited number of program-level summative assessments. So degree, A-level, GCSE, anything you want to, should have formative assessments built in at the modular level, at the lower level, and then a limited number of program-level summative assessment. What we want to do in higher education is not reproduce what's gone on in schools, which is to go, oh, well, exams are really good. One, because they're not really good in terms of, as Mary's pointed out, they can be gamed and cheated. But also, there's also a real question about whether they actually do assess anything worth assessing. So there's no point in going to something that assesses things that aren't worth assessing just because we can have some sense of the fact that nobody's cheating. And so what I want to do is head towards what I think might be a sustainable model for practice, which gives some interesting research and philosophical questions in it. And as Mary's already said, we're not going to be able to make something AI-proof. But my point here isn't to make it AI-proof. It's to focus upon the fact that AI is built in. It's there already. It's really, really useful. I use it most days. It can write emails for me. It works very closely in terms of organizing the programming stuff I need to do at work. And sometimes it produces really good text. I would say I'm dyslexic. Dyslexic philosophers, there are not very many of us, I don't think. And before that, I was a theoretical physicist, and maths is much easier than writing if you're dyslexic, but it's great with spell checker. And it's even better when you can put your stuff through an AI system, because it takes a lot of the load and makes it much easier to write. So I'm really pro those kind of AI things. I think there's rather pointless being a human and doing the stuff a computer can do, because a computer only costs me about 500 or 600 quid. It costs the universities quite a lot more than that just to pay me for a couple of days. I wish I got all the money, but you know. Okay, so a couple of things, principles in my solution, which is that integrity, doing the formative assessments at the modular level well, ought to improve scores on summative assessments. So actually, if you don't cheat or game your formative assessment, you'll do better on summative assessment. Now, I think that's a pretty, good idea about what we think formative assessment does, but it does mean we've got to think much more carefully, I think, about formative assessment, rather than saying, oh, we'll give you a question like the one you're going to get eventually, and then we'll give you a little bit of feedback on it. And that summative assessments ought to be resistant to lack of integrity. So that it ought to be, whatever the assessment is, to whatever extent of AI use is built into that assessment, it ought to be done with integrity. And the key thing here is integrity, not AI use. So that it should be that it's done integrity. And by that I mean that it's done in a way that there are rules in place, and those rules are really good rules because they do a couple of things. They force students to think about learning in particular kind of ways, because we all know we're all lazy. So, it is a natural disposition of human beings to game, cheat, and be lazy. We do it all the time. But we think about that and do that in the right kinds of ways. People don't worry about being at 30.5 miles an hour over the, in the speed limit and think that 40 miles an hour in a 30 zone might be a bit too much. So we have those kind of inbuilt judgments that we make. So the summative assessments ought to be resistant to lack of integrity. They ought to be done in a way that enables the student to learn and be guided in learning, because the whole point of being a student is to learn how to learn and what it means to learn, and that needs us to help them. But also that there's a certain level of fairness here. That one of the criticisms of AI is if you pay for it and pay a lot for it, you get a better AI system. So you can bet your bottom dollar, if you're coming out of a public school, you're going to have a really good AI system. If you come out of a comprehensive from a city centre, you're going to have a really poor one. And we'll spot the poor use of AI every time. If we're using the unpaid-for version of ChatGPT, really easy to pick up hallucinations, etc. More sophisticated one, we won't. So what we're doing is by focusing upon AI use, is actually disadvantaging disadvantaged students. It's not the neoliberal university, it's us. We act immorally, unethically, inappropriately. We are a stain upon the university through time and space. So, what do we do technically here then? Well, I want to say that we do two things. One is in a fuller version of this, and hopefully one day it might actually get out into print, if I can put it through a ChatGPT to make the text good, is that we develop a patchwork text relationship between formative and summative assessments. That is, program level assessments are built upon patches that are collaboratively developed in individual modules. And they might be essays, they might be presentations, they might be short-term exams, they might be recall, they might be annotated bibliographies, it might be 101 different things. Okay? Doesn't matter, we're not really too worried about it, but it might look actually like module assessment at the moment. But what they do is they form little patches. that students then think about. They work collaboratively with their peers. They open up for critique as part of the classroom or the university lecture experience, and are able to develop a greater and develop those practices through that kind of collaborative endeavour and thoughtful endeavour over time. And they build those together, and then in the summative assessments, a wraparound text discussing largely those patches and how they fit together and what they say about their learning, what they say about them as a human being, what they say about how the knowledge they're learning is becoming embedded in their history, how does that relate to their childhood, those kinds of things. This is where, as Dave mentioned, reading of Dreyfus' work on what computers can't do and what they still can't do, and some of the updated work going on now, is that summative assessments should be based on what computers can't do very well. So quite a lot of what we do at the moment is what computers do really well. You know, as long as we put in some basic ideas, the computer can work out how to express those in nice, grammatically correct, whatever language you want, particularly if it's English. I suspect it doesn't work so well in all other languages because the Americans don't think, you know, apart from English and Spanish. So, you know, it already has a kind of a language issue based into it. But looking at what computers can't do well, and actually coming and thinking about those ideas and how those ideas work together is perhaps much more making judgments, making human-style judgments, looking at the way in which knowledge moves across boundaries using subtle metaphor and analogy, ways that can't be predicted. Because remember, the large language models are simply just predicting what the next text or next idea is. What we want is unpredictability. Now, of course, one of the things, I've said this before, one of the things at another meeting, one of the things that we've done really well is we've defined a 2-2 as a student who's read what we get them to read and then regurgitated in an appropriate manner. 2-1's a bit better, first a bit better. In there, we haven't done anything about unpredictability. We struggle with unpredictability because the student submits them and says, well, it doesn't really answer the research question. That is the point. It doesn't answer the question. What it does is interprets the question. Got some other stuff on, I did another paper on Umberto Eco's stuff and interpretation. We've extended the openness in Eco's terms of interpretive possibility of our questions, either on the exam or in our essay question or whatever. We've opened up the possibility of open interpretation, and what we're asking the student to do is engage as a human, interpret what we might mean by this, and then write about that. And as a human, I'll mark it. As a human, I'll mark it, and as a human, I mark it. I can't mark as a human in 7.5 minutes. It takes me a lot longer, maybe 8 or 9 minutes for a postgraduate assessment. But I think 10 minutes, 4,000 words, 10 minutes you get to do that, and then 10 minutes to do the feedback. I can't do that as a human to human, so I can't engage in it. So, of course, I give my students essays, questions to write that I know they're going to be able to write formulaically, that I can mark formulaically, and we're all happy. But, of course, that's exactly what a computer can do. So, that's my solution, is that actually we rethink assessment from the ground up. And one of the things we do is we focus on program level, because there's less of those, maybe 1 or 2 an entire year. Focus on formative, really focus on what humans do. And in doing that, we're able to not defeat AI, not get in a competition with AI, but the fact that students are using AI doesn't really matter, but it does need us to think redemptively about the moment rather than think either in terms of moral panic or in terms of we just want to carry on with the day job, because if we do, A, we're out of business, B, young people want something better and different, and C, there's a whole bunch of people in marketing business who will design something that they really want in order to be able to move forward. So we can say goodbye to the university and hello to whatever comes next, and which people will pay for, the kind of Starbucks of ideas. Thanks very much. Okay, thank you. The microphones. Yeah, over the front. We'll just take a couple of questions, and then do you want to grab a mic over there, and then we'll go into panel.
Hello. I just wanted to clarify something that you said about paying. When you said about why pay a human to do something that a computer can do, and whether you meant that as we have AI now that can do this, that's we may as well use it. And I just wanted to ask whether there's any kind of way that maybe building into these new assessments, we could build into students some kind of understanding that actually it is humans that are doing this. It's humans that have written the stuff that's going on the web that's scraped. It's humans that are coding. The fact that those humans are hidden, a bit like, Primark hides who make the clothes that you buy that are in sweatshops, doesn't mean that the humans aren't there. It just means that we're one step removed from them. And I kind of think that those kind of comments that computers can do this now hides the fact that actually it's still humans that are doing all the work behind this. They're just one step removed. And so I kind of quite like your response to that, and also whether you think there's any point in teaching students that explicitly, because I think the more we use the term AI and the more we talk about AI, it further removes the humans that are doing the work, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't humans involved. I'm just saying that the output isn't the product of human conscious thought in that sense, is that it has an element of, it is generated by a computer. I mean, it's not to say that everything, of course, has its origins in humans, but it doesn't seem to me that, certainly the way AI is going, that it will be the output from an AI will be something that a designer or either that hardware or the software designer has thought about. That's going to be the output. So that's what I mean about the fact that they aren't human. Once we use a lot of project management toolkits to keep us all informed behind the scenes in terms of Microsoft. We're a very strong Microsoft university. And it does all the work for us. Now, of course, that's all designed by people, and it's all kind of managed by our learning and information system people. But nevertheless, it does it, and it does it in prescribed particular kinds of ways. Why would I do all of that, which is what I used to do 20 years ago, when the computer will do it? It seems to me it's not a question of the fact that these computers kind of fall from heaven. They are, of course, made, and they're, of course, designed, and they're designed to do certain things, and they've got certain affordances and certain biases built into them. I'm certainly not making that kind of claim, that they're not human artifacts. But nevertheless, they're not human in the sense that they're humans involved, but they're human artifacts, and they do their thing. And they do their thing without, if we all died tomorrow, our university systems would keep wanting to enroll in September. It would have nobody to enroll, but it would keep enrolling until, the system itself decayed. There's nothing to stop it. That we don't need humans for any of that. Once it's up and running, it will enroll. And if somebody comes down, they can enroll into the university. That's what I mean by there's not that human involvement. I'm certainly not claiming that systems are bias-free, and they're not biased, as indicated in terms of the use of English. There's an inherent bias within that. It's going to be biased towards white, middle class, a whole range of things, and people who think like computer scientists, which is not most of us. Well, they need an input. They don't need a constant input, as ChatGPT 3.2. Once you pull it away from the web and it's done its scraping and learning. But yes, of course, it needs to scrape and it needs to learn. I mean, in terms of the process of developing the system. But once it's scraped and learned, it can keep on running. You don't need to keep scraping. It doesn't need to keep learning. It can just, from what it's learned and what it's scraped, it will generate an output. That's why it hallucinates. Once it's connected into the web and it's continuing to scrape and continuing to engage in the web, then it's a different kind of model. But it doesn't need that. Once it's learned, we can be put on a desert island and we can be separated in the same way the computer can be. So of course it's built on, and one of my worries about universities is that now we've got AI systems built into everything we use. It's now going to continue to scrape everything academics write and make it much better at predicting how to write a good academic essay. So no, I'm not saying it's scraped, but once it's scraped and learnt, it doesn't need any humans. It can keep on going. ChatGPT will, if we all died tomorrow, could keep on producing. It doesn't need any more of us. I mean, that's the kind of negative science fiction model of robots. Once they've reached a certain level of sophistication, they don't need us at all. We're just a disease, killing off the electricity supply. Shall we move to a panel? But yeah, well, because I'm aware that I'm supposed to be vaguely keeping time going. These were set out, so I'm assuming that we weren't quite sure what we were. Barry Manilow, Dave Allen.
Cilla Black.
Okay, so we will need the microphones.
Thank you. I really wanted to say I'm so heartened by all your 3 presentations and building on from phenomenology and what it means to be human, and some really, really good solutions in terms of doing summative assessments reflecting on what it means to be human. And actually, I was thinking, if we do that right, then the disadvantaged students have more to talk about their learning journey. So the summative element will be even better for disadvantaged students, because they can talk about their humanness their distance from A to B is further, the distance travelled. So I just wanted to thank you, and because this moral panic and this thing, what are we going to do about AI? And you've given some really good solutions and discussions about it. So thank you.
Thank you. I would just say the whole purpose of political inequality, of course, is that public schools will train their pupils to be able to answer our summative assessments, whatever we turn them into. So disadvantage will rear its head again, but anybody's interested, I'm doing a paper at SRHE about that, not here.
I really enjoyed all 3 of your perspectives on this as well, and some really great practical suggestions, but I was just wondering, how can these be kind of implemented going forward in terms of, you know, what research is needed to kind of make these, you know, be looked at across the country and, you know, kind of more formalised? I know in some universities they kind of, you know, feel worried about making changes, and, you know, I guess my question is, what kind of research in terms of these practical suggestions, what needs to happen for this to be kind of taken on?
I'll quickly talk about universities, because my view is that, you know, it's harder in schools because of the nature of public external assessments. You know, I actually think the opportunities in universities are there at the moment. I think, you know, this is an opportunity. However much we're actually worried about AI, there is a lot of scrabbling around to look at our assessment practices and to get something in place. And I think there is an opportunity there. You know, we can hijack those existing words that are already around, like integrity or authenticity, different things that have become conflated at my institution in a really sort of annoying way. But we can sort of get into those discussions, and I think it's about how radical and persuasive you can be in what you want to propose for a particular programme level. I'm less optimistic about the speed of change in schools or the possibilities to be persuasive in that context.
Yeah, I think what potentially is happening in schools at the moment is a kind of fingers in the ears, sort of in England, of a can't cope with that at the moment. I think there's 2 issues there. One is to do with kind of actually even embracing and engaging with quality technology, particularly in state education. Again, the quality of what's available in schools is very poor, and the Department for Education are very aware of this. And I've had conversations recently in the DFE with this, and their response to it at the moment is closing ranks in terms of assessment, that we look at ways to nail down assessment back to anchoring it onto exams, anchoring it onto very narrow formula for testing that can't interact with you know, AI in ways that, you know, they may be concerned about. And I think that is a big problem, you know, because I think I agree with both Dave and with Richard that there's just a huge amount of possibility here. I mean, the work that I've done with Pearson, it's not that AI is coming. They've been doing this work using AI models for 15 years. And so, I've been looking at test-taker interaction, and that's the first study with human interaction, looking at that we've done, and we're now moving into a new phase of looking at that because they're interested in it. But, that technology is brilliant. And coming back to some of the things that were said over there before, the most boring thing in the world is marking scripts that are following a formula. Well, it's great if we can stop having to do that, for goodness sake. And AI does it better. And we also know from medical research, I don't know if any of you have come across that they're now finding that there are AI models that can diagnose certain illnesses better than human beings and more accurately than human beings now. So, it's really positive, but it's how we're going to harness it.
Yeah, I mean, I think just, I think university level, I mean, I'm rather fortunate that I convene the AI and write the guidance on for academics in our place. And we've got one we've done, and we're just convening again for the guidance for next year because we reckon that we're going to change the guidance every year. We're not quite as radical as I'd like us to be yet, but I think we do have a approach in which we can start to say, well, actually, this is a fundamental question. It's not just about AI. It incorporates a whole range of other things. And I think at a university central level, it is, we tie a lot onto things like authentic assessment because we're a post-92 university, so we're interested in professional, vocational, occupational courses. So authentic assessment is kind of critically important. So authentic assessment then starts to say, well, what's AI look like in the workplace? And then how do we build that into the kind of things that we're teaching and learning in the university? So I think one of the things is how do you tie yourself at a university level into the brand and to the purpose of the university, because this is where it kind of hits PVC and VC kind of interest, not actually at the level of the technical level of assessment.
Hi, thank you very much. That's very interesting. I wanted to kind of elaborate a bit further on AI as an opportunity, because my students are certainly not having a moral panic over ChatGPT. Or Bart. And during the last year, they've improved immensely, these softwares. And I'm wondering, how do you think we can embed, or do you think we should embed these language models in our teaching? And if so, how?
Shall I go?
Go ahead.
I just started straight away. As soon as I found out I could access it, I began playing around with it at home, and then I began to just think, okay, how do I embed it in the teaching from here? And I teach master's level, and doctoral students too, but also because it's a master's in assessment, of course. I just started to think, okay, how am I going to link this in? And I started to just use it every week, so that when we came to the Q&A sessions in every taught seminar, I would open ChatGPT and say, okay, what are we asking it this week? What's it going to turn out? And then started to build a kind of corpus as well for the students of the kind of language around it. I thought it was interesting earlier because Richard, you used that term hallucinate. I don't know if everyone in the room knows about that. I only heard it recently that we talk about large language models hallucinating when they can't find exactly what they need. Basically, they just make it up. So I found that out quite quickly, that if you ask it to put references in, then it will make things up if it can't find them. And I think that's quite a nice description of it as hallucination. So it is a case of drawing that in. It's a bit like, if you don't want your kids to drink too much, it's like letting them have the occasional drink. I kind of saw it like that I thought, okay, I'm going to keep introducing it and letting them play with it and use it so that we explore what it is and knock some of that mystique away.
Yeah, this doesn't directly answer the question, but I have been inclined to embrace the various developments. I'm not as old as I look. I haven't worn very well. So I'm of that generation, I think, with new technologies, that when a new technology comes, it was what you were already, I compare it to my parents. They look at a thing like, what am I supposed to do with this? Whereas I'm always trying to articulate, there should be a thingy, we can do this, there should be a thingy that, and someone will go, yeah, and this is what you're looking for. So again, I can't remember the name of it, but I was shown a couple of months ago. You know, I was always thinking in my academic work, it's wonderful when you find a paper that you love, you follow all the references, that's brilliant. But if only you could follow them back, you know, forwards. If only you could follow what then. But well, there's various kinds of subscription AI softwares that have access to that literature, and will do that for you. And I just think, if I say to my students, if I'd had that when I was an undergraduate, my whole academic career would have been different. I mean, it's an amazing possibility, but it just moves the dialogue that we're having into a different space. The point is that we're having that dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are three things I try and push. One is that students to be able to have a go with AI and just have a play with it, so that they're actually not scared of AI. Second is for them to realize that there's a kind of evolutionary argument here that AI is generating lots and lots of different formats, and eventually a lot of them are just going to wither on the vine. And we saw that in a whole range of other things, you know, social media sites, etc. You know, whoever remembers MySpace these days. You know, some lasted, some didn't. And the third is you know, keeping a watchful brief on the kind of things that are going on outside of the university in terms of where our students are going to go to. And that, you know, for me with my research students, that is, you know, using Research Rabbit and Consensus and Iris.ai and things like that in order to be able to look at how I map and think about my literature reviews. And there'll be other things that come up. Some stuff is so expensive that I can't afford to pay for it. But nevertheless, some of those things will be are coming down the line for our graduates when they'll use them after they graduate, whether it's into work or into future study. And I think it's keeping that watching brief so that they're able to both be confident with AI use, have a sense of its limitations and the fact that it will come and go, and thirdly to be able to hang on to the kinds of things that are emerging in different areas, because again, there will become a standard way in which AI systems kind of engage themselves with the human. So that human AI interaction is going to become standardized because we can't learn how to use 150 different AI systems. And so we want our students to be able to do that when they head into the work, same way they can use Microsoft Word, they can use, and then they can use Google Docs and everything else because they all look more or less the same. They should also be able to engage with AI systems. So those kind of three things that kind of underpin, if you like, my pedagogy of AI, if I have such a thing.
I'd just like to share a personal reflection that's happened to me in the last few days. Obviously, we have a lot of discussions around the panic and also the transformative side of it. The panic always tends to be around the assessment. The transformative always tends to be around the pedagogy. And we tend to come at it from a teaching perspective. But I was sat down on Monday in a cafe in Birmingham, and my daughter came down from Nottingham to meet me, and she's doing veterinary science in Nottingham. And she had her iPad open, and I could not believe the agency with which she was learning. She had about 3 AI tools opened up. She had OneNote opened up. She had her self-directed learning modules opened up, and she was just whizzing around. And we are almost talking steps behind where the learners are. And this is a very fast game, isn't it? So just a comment.
No, thank you. I think that's right. I have to say, my daughter's doing sociology, and I spent the entire summer. We've been working on AI systems. She's not allowed to use. Well, no, I won't say which university is that, but they've done with that kind of very lax kind of AI systems exist. We encourage students to think about them, but we don't want them to use them really. But we're not quite sure what we really mean by that. But yeah, she has But it's also about these are quality issues again. She has a computer, she has a couple of iPads, she has her iPhone, and very often she's working on 3 screens. In order to be able to do that, because one screen's no longer enough. So, yeah, I mean, I think students are further ahead of us, in many of them, and I think that's part of the problem, part of our concern about catching up with what many of them are, but some of them aren't. And that's always been the case, that we've always assumed that our top end are representative of young people because they're going to be really, whether that was the digital native discourse, whatever. But actually, many of them aren't, and many of them aren't anywhere near as sophisticated, and they've got to be supported appropriately, and our system can't disadvantage them.
And just linking back to what one of the other presentations, we were talking about it being a dialogic process. And that's one of the dangers I thought of, because she could get locked into her own dialogical process with the AI and with her self-learning in a sense. And if her foundational background knowledge isn't secure, then that learning is taking place on an unsecure foundation. So therefore that dialogic process can be internal with the AI in self-learning, but more importantly, it needs to be dialogic with other humans, and that can be lost as well, and it can become an independent process.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a design question for us again, because actually we design AI systems within more social sharing systems. So again, you know, daughter quite happily have a system open, a video open, and a chat going, and not necessarily all to the same people, not necessarily all on the same subject, but that works well. She's not kind of divorced from that, but that was true when we home educated her as well. So, you know, she was engaged through the computer with other people, and that worked well, and she actually met up with people. So I think part of this is a design question. Of course, we don't want students just to be focused on AI all the time, but, you know, I watch Netflix through the computer with people, and we watch it and have the shared cameras open so we can watch it in cinema mode, you know, that because we're a long way away from people. So, you know, it is about designing and thinking about how we do that, I think, which is, and being aware of it. Yeah.
Can I just think about that? I've been thinking away about your concern about a secure foundation, you know, about the nature of the background and what might happen as a result of that. And I was just thinking, you know, how does that connect with, you know, as an academic, my concerns about assessment. And one of the things I was saying is, you know, if part of assessment is about picking up misconceptions, yeah, that's what's often used in assessment design talk in school-based assessment. Universities, our assessments are not very good at doing that. You know, the chances of picking up any significant amount of the misconceptions that might be being accrued through all of that independent relation with text, you know, and I kind of think, I've probably picked up a whole bunch of misconceptions, really, and I only realised they're misconceptions, you know, through dialogic opportunities, through those kind of and, you know, maybe, yeah, that's all I have to say on that, but I was thinking about it.
Okay, I think we've got 3 or 4 questions or comments to come, so, and 10 minutes, so I'm just saying to us as much as anybody else.
Hello. I was just going to check then. Good afternoon. Yeah, just good afternoon. Thank you ever so much for the presentations. I ran the BERA SIG for HE, and we talked about AI as one of our first things, and there was lots and lots of really interesting comments. One of the things was about where assessment meets feedback. I think we've talked about a dialogic approach. We've talked about that often students are ahead of us. We've talked about that there's an equity issue, that maybe some students are and some students aren't. And I was wondering in your work whether you've come across any interesting papers or things you might be able to talk to us about where we prepare our either HE or school-based students for the emotional resilience and the ability to respond to a feedback that might be generated from an AI when they can't ask why or how, or possibly there may be some difficulties or issues that sit with that, and whether you think as the instructor or the facilitator, the teacher, the lecturer, whatever you might call yourself, whether your role will change.
Okay, I think the first thing I'd say from an assessment point of view, that it'd be very hard at the moment to get a suitable AI tool to create good feedback. And by that, I mean feedback that is actually useful to somebody. Of course, you can write the algorithms to get it to churn out, you've met this criteria in this one, but that's not feedback in a useful, educative sense. So I think we're quite a long way from that, from knowing what I know as people that I work with internationally who are developing these kind of tools. So I think for us, it's still understanding the limitations of where within the assessment and feedback cycle you position AI and what it's useful for. And I think, yeah, that's really all that we could say on that at the moment, because the kind of, it's just not at that point yet. And it might not be. We don't know.
Well, one area where I think it might be worth thinking, and I think Dreyfus points us in this direction as well, is on that when you were talking about feedback and the possible results, the possible impact of feedback, right? So a teacher is tactful in giving feedback. Yeah, and tact is a really fruitful philosophical term, but actually you can think of it in those sort of basic everyday ways that we think about tact. So tact obviously is about touching, being able to feel your way. You know, you could link that to bodies, except that tact is already used quite metaphorically in teaching. You know, we don't feel our way directly with students anymore. We don't touch them so often, but still the idea of tact still has currency. And I think this is an interesting one to think about. So we have the promise of the AI, which will use facial recognition, biometric data, all of your shopping history. So when you come into the shop, it will read your face, and the AI, as shop assistant, will be able to guide you to the clothing that you want. And of course, part of that, now, any one example I give, you'll say, well, you can easily tell an AI not to do that. But that's not kind of the point. The example is just illustrative of any number of things that could emerge. You know, so I come in and the AI assistant says, well, you're somebody who's concerned about their weight, so I'm going to direct you towards these kinds of clothes. Now, you know, we can say, well, you can make a rule to say that it doesn't do that, but tact doesn't operate by making rules. It operates by being appropriately in the situation to know how to go on in that situation. And that, I think, if we're looking at key differences and key capacities which are distinctively human, tact has got a lot of mileage there.
I mean, I guess I go back to a little project one of our engineering lecturers did, which was at the end of every week he did a little kind of quiz, online quiz, where students, if they got the wrong answer, they could find out where it was in the lecture, etc., go back, etc. You know. So I could see how an AI system can be enhanced to be able to look at how that kind of process, which is slightly dialogic in the sense, but it's about helping the students to be able to go through and recall and think about and be directed towards the information, might work very well. I mean, there's a couple of research reports out of Australia. If you text me, I'll find what the references are, which compared feedback from ChatGPT systems and human feedback, and found there were similarities in terms of the content of that. But it doesn't necessarily say how a student would respond knowing it was a AI system as opposed to a human. They were just testing it against whether or not it looked similar. And I guess one of the questions is, you know, do you trust an AI system that's going to give you feedback if that feedback's going to be important? If it's feed-forwardy type things that's going on in the process of your learning and is highly formative and it's seen as being that, then I think maybe students might be, in the same way they've taken on chatbots, might well embrace this as being a more effective way, given the alternative is nothing.
Thank you, and thank you all three of you. I really enjoyed that. Thank you. And I suppose we talked a bit, there's two interconnected questions, if that's okay. We talked a bit about the roles that AI can play. For example, in diagnosis, it can be more accurate and better than us. And as well, it could do some jobs that we don't want to do, such as literature searches and stuff like that. But however, by doing that, we put some of the epistemic responsibility onto the AI. So when we talk about, I know a diagnosis being true, we say, oh, I know this due to the AI telling it me. It's not somebody's knowledge necessarily, it's the AI informing us of that fact. And I suppose the question I have to you is, how much epistemic responsibility do you want to actually put onto AI, and connecting that to learners and learning? Like, what should learners know and be able to do, and what should AI be able to do? As in, what's that relationship between the two? Thank you.
Well, you start. Yeah.
Just very quickly, and I'm not going to answer your question. I'm just going to be slightly facetious. But you know, I read a lot of, you know, Anglo-American philosophy from a certain period, and you read the introduction, you read the author's introduction to those books, and they always include, of course, I wouldn't have been able to achieve any of this without my research assistant X. And the research assistant is a human being completely lost to the history of philosophical research, who was probably doing for that figure a lot more than an AI currently does. So it doesn't really answer your question, but I'm just saying there's perhaps nothing new in that situation.
I mean, I think medical diagnostics is a really interesting one because it's quite convenient, because if it gets it wrong and the patient dies, then you can measure that. So, and I think that, of course, retains the, you know, that's a conversation I have with my colleagues in the medical school quite often. It's much more difficult in education because we might only know we got it wrong 10, 15, 20 years down the line. So there's a real problem about the fact that it's to find that causal relationship between what we do and the student outcome is really very poor. It's why, you know, the real problems with the present way in which the UK regulatory environment set up, because causal relationships like that just don't work. It's much more complex. So I think the issue is that we're the human in the room, we're the lecturers in the room. We retain responsibility for just about everything, including the literature we tell our students to read. And I get really irate when my colleagues are suggesting literature they've not read. You know, at least flick through it, see whether it's any good. So I think that notion of we retain responsibility over that in the classroom across a degree or school process, the teacher in the same kind of position, we have moral responsibility there. And I think we therefore need to be convinced ourselves that the AI system, the way it's being used, is an appropriate thing for our students in this particular context, to the best of our ability. And if we get it wrong, we get it right. I think when I was doing teacher training, I think my tutor said, well, probably 30% of lessons go okay. You know, this is back a long time ago. 70% kind of aren't that good. You know, maybe 10, 15% are really, really bad. But that's just teaching. Because, you know, as happened to be one day when somebody took the back door off my lab, I taught physics, out into the courtyard, and they just came along and decided they were going to take the door off and shave it down because it was sticking in the middle of a year 9 lab experiment. It went quite badly because they were all more excited about, you know, what was going on at the back of the class than what I was teaching them. You know, that's kind of teaching.
I think the other thing here is a broader kind of philosophical question about what the aim of what you are actually doing and the aim of education is here. And I think when you come back to your perspectives on, you know, how much emphasis you might put on something, to think a very basic thing to do with assessment that I constantly harp on about is that we don't have any perfect assessments. They just don't exist. And that idea that's often touted is that, you know, exams are the most rigorous, reliable, etc. to an extent. Yeah, to an extent they are, but not in every case. And there's no such thing as a perfect assessment, and it doesn't exist. So, you know, even if we put AI in charge, there will still be issues down the road, exactly as you said, because we're also then interacting with human beings, and therein lies the other part of the problem. Thank you.
Can I quickly come?
I'm just going to point, so there's one more over there. If you take the mic over there. Yeah.
Just quickly come back to what you said. You offered that little formula, the 30% or whatever. And I know you were being ever so slightly facetious, but you probably weren't, because there was a time when it was okay to say that. But it perhaps exposes why, you know, you have less to do with teacher education now. Not why. Exposes that. Sorry, you have less to do with teacher education.
Yeah, that's why as well.
Because of course, your DFE representative or your advocate of contemporary cognitive science will go, that was the old way. That's exactly the problem. 30% success isn't good enough, which is why we've discovered the algorithms that you follow, which is why those same people are concerned about teaching being replaced by AI. Because as you said about assessment, you know, it's our fault. We have made of assessment something which could easily be done by an AI. That's the way we might be going with teaching. Because of those kinds of concerns, which are a different kind of concern, we're really feeling our way around. It's not good enough to feel your way around, so you need to follow an algorithm. That's why we're worried that AI may replace the teacher.
I just want to say I think my teaching was better. It wasn't that it was 30% successful, it was just 30% it went okay. I think the kids learned far more when it wasn't. So.
Thank you very much for the session. It's been incredibly thought-provoking. And I'm a great fan of mulling, and I'm kind of aware that AI doesn't mull. And it makes me worry a little bit, because I kind of think of it, what came into my head when you were all speaking was a droplet of water finding the quickest path down, which to me is possibly what AI would do. But in doing that, there's perhaps a more interesting pathway it could have taken. And for me, the thing that I'm kind of mulling on at the moment is the loss of voice. And you mentioned that if you'd had AI, it could have gone a completely different way. And I kind of worry a little bit that we're going to lose some voice, some ideas, because the water droplet is going to take the shortest pathway.
Okay, just 10 seconds each, because we're run out of time, so yeah.
Can I come really quickly? Yeah, what I mean is I would have had other things to mull and meander about. But I think your concern is absolutely right, because the AI isn't modelling any of those processes that we want our students to embrace. It doesn't backtrack, it doesn't correct itself, it doesn't realise its own mistakes, it doesn't meander, it doesn't peter out in an answer.
I'd come back to what I said before. It's about deciding what the aim of education is. What do we want from education? And then linking it to assessment and thinking about whether you use AI or not. What do you want to know about what students know? What are we going to use it for?
Yeah, and I just finished with the notion that the human mind is a particular kind of mind, and it's very good, and it's the one we've got. So, you know, and we know what it operates and looks like from the inside, and that's what we want for our students. It's 12:30. Thank you all very, very much for staying.